I already had a wife.
One of my favorite movies is From Dusk Till Dawn. Not only does George Clooney play an excellent, snarky piece of crap thief, but the entire movie is completely unhinged thanks to Quentin Tarantino's script, and he definitely wrote this scene with himself in mind. What a legend. What I also love is the completely unforeshadowed genre switch from crime thriller to action horror. Normally, I wouldn't like a change like this, but again, the movie is just so unhinged and fun that it just works, and... Did you notice something? I just said horror and fun in the same breath. That means that something has gone very, very wrong. And that's what this video is going to be about. I want to talk about the subgenre of action horror and ask the question, does it really exist? But before I answer that question, I do want to quickly thank you all for 1,000 subscribers. It really does mean a lot to me. Like I said in my last video, I have a lot of big plans for this channel and really cool things are coming. Please leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy this kind of content, and make sure to check out my other socials in the description. Now, we need to define exactly what we're talking about when we talk about action and horror. So let's start with action. Action is a pretty broad genre, but we can define it. So what makes up an action story? Well, it has to have a lot of action. This means choreographed physical feats of strength, oftentimes in the form of a fight. There's a lot of fights in action movies, if you couldn't tell. But I want to go a little bit deeper than just that. Whenever I think about action movies or action stories, I always think about the action hero. You know, people like Jack Reacher, John Wick, John McClane, Tyler Rake, Captain Price, James Reese, literally I mean Court Gentry. You can't really have good action without an action hero. In these stories, especially nowadays, the action hero is often in the gray zone of morality, but still morally superior to all of the villains, and they'll often take on multiple opponents in these fights, whether you want to call them expendables or red shirts, whatever quirky name you want to give them. They often take on multiple opponents at once because overwhelming odds are more intense for the viewer. This could be through setting traps, superior strategic thinking, or just going in completely guns blazing. And oftentimes, the action hero wins. And that's not to say that all action thrillers are just cheap escapist slop. There's a lot of deep, powerful, meaningful action thrillers out there, and they're also really good vessels for character studies sometimes. But for the most part, the audience is watching an action movie to see a powerful protagonist take on a bunch of bad guys and win. Now, action isn't always about fights and taking on opponents head-on. Sometimes it's about escaping traps or a high-speed chase. Sneaking into a compound or enemy base or planning a heist are also common tropes, but I think personally more fall into the category of suspense than straight-up action, at least until the plan is executed. I really think what most people think of when they think of an action story is a single protagonist or a group of protagonists taking on overwhelming odds in the form of multiple opponents in a big fight. But the really important thing that we need to take away from this is that there's always a spectacle of some kind. A flashy, fast-paced spectacle of protagonists getting into these physical feats of action in a visually appealing way. Whether that's actually visual or visual in your mind's eye, like with most serial military thrillers in the vein of like Tom Clancy, Jack Carr, and Vince Flynn. I mean guys, there's a reason why most stunt performers start out in dance. It's all about putting on the visually appealing spectacle of a well-choreographed performance. So, we have a definition now. Action is a genre based around a physically fit, relatively powerful protagonist taking on challenges, danger, and enemies using mostly physical means, i.e. physical action. Now, some of the big-brained people in the audience will probably see where I'm going with this essay, but before I elaborate on that, let's go on to defining horror. And I know this is literally the bit that I did in my last video, where if Pyrocynical made my video, he would go 5 hours defining what horror is, but just bear with me for a second.
Hey guys, it's Editing Michael here. I'm just interjecting really quickly to let you know that the following background footage is being taken from one of my live streams. With some exception, because I am a pretty busy guy, I stream every Friday at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, and we mostly just play horror games, and sometimes I'll write on stream or just talk, whatever we feel like doing at the time. So if you're interested at all in this kind of content and you want to get some more because my upload schedule is atrocious, then make sure to check those out every Friday at 7 p.m. I'll see you all then. Oh wait, I have to do something cool to bring it back. I don't know,
Well, this one should be easy. It's a genre that's supposed to make you scared. It's supposed to make you feel dread, unease, or even disgust. But believe it or not, this is hard to do when you, the audience member, the reader, or the player, are not in any actual danger. Still, that's what the entire genre is founded on, so obviously it's possible. How do you do it? Well, honestly, there's a lot of ways, but one of the most effective, in my opinion, is atmosphere. This can be accomplished through like different camera tricks, filters, word choice, lighting, sound effects. any manner of things that aren't explicitly scary, like monsters or gore. Jump scares are also used a lot in movies and games, but I wouldn't overdo them, and in my opinion, they work better once you first establish that atmosphere. There's also pacing. One of the most important things to get right about your story in any genre is pacing. You can have atmosphere, but you also need build-up. If you're about to reveal something scary to your audience, it's important to have that reveal delayed. Have the characters slowly, with trembling fingers, reach for the doorknob, or slowly pace down that dimly lit hallway. Delaying the reveal like that and building up the suspense will have your audience squirming in their seats, especially if you show how scared the characters actually are in that moment. Whether that's through describing their racing thoughts on the page or showing them quivering on the screen. Another good way to instill fear and dread into your audience is to simply make the characters helpless in their situation. Whether it's a group of unarmed teenagers against a supernatural slasher, or a group of normal humans against incomprehensible cosmic horrors. Having your characters be completely helpless will not only enhance the bleak atmosphere, but more effectively instill fear in the audience, as long as the characters are likable enough for the audience to be attached. Because how else is the audience supposed to be scared in your story if A, the audience is not in any real danger, B, your characters are unlikable, or C, your characters can effectively defend themselves? I think we've arrived at the crux of the problem here with action horror, gentlemen, and it can be summarized like this. The two genres are inherently incompatible. Now, before I get into specific examples here, I want to make it absolutely clear that I'm not hating on these movies as movies. Like I said, From Dusk Till Dawn is one of my favorite movies of all time. All I'm saying is that they're not scary. I really don't think this is a hot take. I just want to break down exactly why. Problem 1. Defenselessness. Horror is a slow burn about defenseless characters going up against overwhelming odds, whereas action is a fast-paced spectacle where the main characters defend themselves quite successfully. When put that way, the two genres seem completely irreconcilable. Let's look at From Dusk Till Dawn. When the vampires are revealed, it becomes a complete fight for survival, with some of the most awesome, but also the most ridiculous fight scenes I've ever seen. These are fast-paced, intense, and fun spectacles, but I don't think it's meant to be scary. It definitely wasn't scary for me. Even when the protagonists start getting picked off and it becomes more desperate, with the way that the scene is directed and the dialogue, the tone signals more of a fast-paced action spectacle to me than it does a horror movie. And that's not to say there aren't some creepy moments, but again, it's overshadowed by the spectacle. Now let's look at a more modern example. The Walking Dead. While constantly labeled as horror, the reason why I fell in love with the show when it was still good was that Rick Grimes was an awesome, badass action hero.
They're fucking with the wrong people.
He was a grizzled survivor who could take on multiple opponents, not quite in the same way John Wick does, but still really effectively. And he dished out justice in an effective way to protect his family. I'm not saying the guy was a saint by any stretch of the imagination. He's an anti-hero, but like I said in the beginning, he's morally superior to all of the villains that he faces. No matter how creepy the zombie designs were, or how harrowing the survival situations were, I was always just on the edge of my seat and excited because I was waiting for a new villain faction to be introduced so that Rick Grimes could have another group of people to fight. Here's a tip for horror writers out there. If you want to instill fear in your audience, you should not have your audience wanting your protagonist to get into a sticky situation because they know they're going to win. Problem 2, relatability. There's another problem that I want to get into that I didn't get into in my definitions of these genres, and that's the problem of relatability to the threat. This doesn't apply to all action horror movies, or all action or horror movies, it's just something that I've noticed in some of them. Horror is a genre that's often built on the unknown, and not knowing a lot about your threat or how they think, feel, strategize will enhance the dread and terror of your story. But 90% of the time in action movies, the threat is all too human. I can understand how a human thinks and strategizes and what they believe in, making them, while they can be threatening to the protagonist in the world of the story, not inherently horrifying the way that like a cosmic horror or an alien or a monster can be. And no matter how powerful a human is, I know that they are mortal and they can be defeated. Let's look at Blade. The vampires in the story look kind of creepy, sure, and there's definitely some creepy moments, but on top of our character being a super powerful badass, the vampires are very humanized villains that think and strategize less like scary monsters and more like a gang of criminals. It's a completely different kind of suspense. So can the subgenre be done well? I think it can. Okay guys, let's think about this. Let's look at our rules here for action and horror and see if we can figure something out. Well, we're gonna have to get rid of the powerful protagonist, alright? There's just no way it's gonna work in a horror story. We're gonna have to get rid of the defenseless characters for horror. I mean, if they can't defend themselves at all, then there's not gonna be much action, is there? Okay, let's put these together, and... Wait a minute. This is just most survival horror video games. A lot of survival horror games are known for their combat. You're not often just given instructions to run away and hide, but you're also given the means to defend yourself. Now, this does not always work in the game's favor. It's the common meme of how when you get a gun in a horror game, the dynamic completely changes. It can completely wreck the tone if you give your character a weapon in a horror game. But sometimes it doesn't. With the right game designer and the right difficulty setting, the weapons won't always help. The best horror game should make it hard for you to find ammo to keep yourself safe, and it should also make the enemies take more than a few rounds to take down. Also, in general, most horror protagonists tend to just be everyday people, the everyman archetype. Having the weapons be less accurate in order to represent how your character is a normal guy who's not trained proficiently in weapons can also make the game more intense and enhance the dread, while still having some action in it. Cry of Fear is a game that does this really well, and it still has that horror atmosphere. It has really eerie environment design, sound, and lighting, and on harder difficulties, I found myself getting jump scared in places that I didn't on easier difficulties. And unlike in action games, I wasn't going in like John Wick, all guns blazing and getting excited for fights. I was dreading fights. On the difficulty I played, because I haven't unlocked the hardest difficulty yet, I still got full magazines for my Glock, but that's kind of moot when most enemies take half a magazine to bring down anyway. And I'm not that accurate after a jump scare, so I wind up turning off my body cam and dumping half the magazine in the general direction of the enemy. And on top of that, the morphine that you heal with is rarer, and when I know that I'm low on ammo, enemies take half a magazine to bring down, and I haven't found morphine in a while, I play differently. Let me tell y'all, I started clearing rooms and cutting the cheese wheel like a Navy SEAL. I was locked in. It also forces you to utilize every tool and mechanic that you have at your disposal that you probably wouldn't do on easier difficulties. Honestly, harder difficulties are just the way to go in horror video games. You might be physically fit, you might be relatively powerful, but you're not an all-powerful, badass action hero. You're just a guy desperate to survive. As a final side note that I couldn't really fit neatly into any section of this video, you also need to think about where exactly you want the horror to come from in your story. I can fight and kill as many humans as I want to, but if I'm fighting my way through some secret compound that's guarding like a world-ending monster of some kind, that's still scary. No matter how many humans I kill, that thing is still there, and the human threat doesn't really matter. It's ancillary to the true horror of that story. It's a distraction. The horror doesn't come from the people your characters are fighting in that story. Alien Isolation has human enemies that you can get into shootouts with, but the real threat of the story is the freaking alien. At the beginning of this video, I said that if horror and fun are in the same breath, something has gone wrong. To an extent, I stand by that, but I don't think any of us would be here if we didn't find the idea of being scared fun to some degree. I think the problem comes in when the director, author, or game designer tries to make it fun, when, ironically enough, that's not what we find fun about horror. This problem also goes into the subgenre of action comedy for probably obvious reasons, so I'm not going to make a separate video on that, but comedy and horror are often interlinked. They're both built on suspense to some degree, and setup and payoff. There's even ways to do dark comedy in a horror story that actually enhances the horror atmosphere rather than detracting from it, with like a gallows humor kind of thing. Some of my favorite stories do that really well, but that's hard, and a lot of authors don't nail it. And listen, this is also partly a taste problem. What scares me isn't always going to scare you, so if you disagree with any of my choices or anything I said in this video, please leave a comment. I want to start a discussion here. I'm always down for having discussions about art and writing so that we can all improve. And plus, I would legitimately love to see some action horror that is actually scary, because in my opinion, it's rare, and I would love to see some examples that actually work. If you have any, please drop them in the comments. I'd love to watch them. Or play them or read them. I think that the main takeaway from this video that I want you to take away if you're an author is that tone is extremely fragile. It's a hard balancing act, and the content of your story needs to reflect the tone you're trying to convey. So you need to think, Do you want a horror story with some action in it, or do you want an action story with some horror elements? Either way is fine, and there's a lot of great stories that are one or the other. Just make sure you get the balancing act right.